There are just a number of variables facing the AI generation and AI monetization. The big question, again, is where is the payoff going to come? How are they going to recoup their investment? Good morning, and welcome to Life in the Markets. My name is Stephen Rohr, and I'm a wealth manager here at the Life Financial Group. Hope you had lovely weather this weekend like we did, and were able to get outside to enjoy it. Last week was another interesting week for the markets. The S&P was down slightly as of the end of the week, down negative 0.61%, while the S&P 500 equal weight was up ever so slightly. The Nasdaq dropped 1.62 points, so a little more substantially. This was no surprise, however, given the cash flow news from some of the big tech names in their quarterly earnings reports this week. We'll get into that more later. Now, the Russell 2000 was also down 0.79%. International EFO was basically flat, up only 8 basis points. Gold and silver were up 0.87%. and 3.97% respectively. Still down a good bit year to date for both silver and gold. Oil surged and crested $100 this week as tensions resumed and were inflamed again with Iran. However, over the weekend and towards the end of the week, it started to drop, particularly over the weekend when the news broke that they had ceased firing again. Now it's down, in the low to mid 80s as of this morning. So it's good news. We'll take that. Bonds were also down, with the AG at negative 0.74% for this week. The 10-year Treasury was up 2.41% this week to end at 4.68%. Going back to what we briefly touched on in the beginning, why was the Nasdaq off this week despite wonderful earnings reports? So while some big tech names' earnings were excellent, their spending on AI is still devouring it faster than it can grow. Alphabet, so the parent to Google and other companies, increased its earnings per share from $2.33 per share in Q2 of 2025 to $9.23 per share in the second quarter of 2026. Now, at the same time, they also increased their profit margin to 94%. Why isn't Alphabet's share price skyrocketing with such phenomenal news? The truth is, these earnings are a little bit tricky. Much of these earnings were driven by appreciation in equity investments. Some of these were a surprise. We didn't know that they actually had a $94 billion stake in SpaceX and some other companies like Anthropic. Because these are unrealized gains, and because they can't sell these for 180 days, they're really just locked into this position, these earnings aren't actually affecting their cash flow. Because these are just paper gains, and frankly, these are gains as of the end of June, and with SpaceX continued decline over this month since June, many of those gains will have deteriorated at this point, and those gains provided $77.1 billion of their $99 billion of earnings this past quarter. The net income, rather. So with their AI spending so high and their actual cash flow significantly less than their net income, that meant their cash flow was actually negative for Q2. It was negative $5.9 billion. This is a similar story with some of the other hyperscalers as well. Now, before we go on, maybe you've been hearing this word and aren't quite sure what is meant by it. It's hyperscalers. Well, according to Denodo.com, hyperscalers are large-scale cloud service providers that offer highly scalable and flexible computing infrastructure to businesses and organizations. These companies operate massive data centers, leveraging advanced networking, storage, and computing capabilities to deliver cloud-based services effectively. Hyperscalers enable businesses to dynamically manage workloads, optimize costs, and drive innovation through cloud computing. Maybe that definition simply put you to sleep on this early Monday morning. For those of you who are still with us, another way to say it, hyperscalers are the ones building the data centers in what seems like all of our backyards. Alphabet and its hyperscaler peers, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and Oracle, they're planning on spending $700 billion in CapEx on AI data centers this year. Whether data centers are going to be the destroyers of their communities or the infrastructure of our new economic miracle is a hot topic of debate across the country. I suspect that there is something to both sides of that. Grassroots efforts, in any case, are putting up a very stiff resistance to the immense capital of the hyperscalers on the other side. So, for instance, one of the top Republican candidates for Florida governor, James Fishback, has made it a central campaign platform that there will be no new data centers in Florida under his management. I haven't looked into the studies on impact to surrounding water supplies or other negative effects to the environs of the data centers, but it is certain that data centers have caused electrical rates to increase substantially in many of the areas around them, as reported by Reuters in an article just a couple weeks ago on July 7th. This is terrible, obviously. That community is, in effect, subsidizing the hyperscalers' expenses by paying substantially more for their electricity. So the community resistance should be helpful, at least, in gaining some concessions from the hyperscalers to offset some of those negatives. For instance, they are beginning to develop some alternative energy creation and generation to supply the electricity needed for the data centers, independent of the rest of the grid. If they have solutions like this that emerge, maybe the data centers won't be quite so onerous and appear so offensive to the communities around them. But in any case, it does affect the cost estimates for the ROI on these data centers. This is why many investors are starting to become a little leery of the vast amounts of money that are being poured into the data centers for AI. Without a clear path to monetization for AI, and now that they are running out of cash to keep funding these data centers, and with the negative pushback on actually getting these data centers built in any case, there are just a number of variables and headwinds facing the AI generation and AI monetization. So investors are starting to become worried that the hyperscalers are using debt now to finance these. With that in mind, that is why the NASDAQ was down this week so significantly, despite some very good earnings reports. Other news this week, there were new tariffs of about 10 to 12.5% announced on 60 different countries this week. President Trump has put these out to replace the 10% kind of across the board that tariffs that he had put in place after the Supreme Court struck down most of his other tariffs. These replacement tariffs that he just announced are established as a response to forced labor on goods being produced in those countries and being exported to the United States. If you're going to have a reason to create a tariff, forced labor is certainly a good reason. We would say that is a good moral cause for that. And historically, the courts have found that to be a good reason and have upheld that as a just cause to have those tariffs. So strategic for President Trump to pick this, but also a good reason. With the forced labor, I mean, it is a difficult subject. It's difficult to really get good information on what's happening in countries where there's limited ability for us to investigate and get information. And sometimes we get conflicting reports like, Well, yes, are the conditions in these sweatshops very bad? Yes. But are they better than some of the workers' alternatives? I remember hearing recently a story of there was a woman who was happy to be working in the sweatshop because her alternative was prostitution. And that's what she was doing before that. Things can get a little convoluted, but it is true that there is substantial forced labor that is being used by many economies and countries around the world to the detriment of not only their people who are being enslaved, but also to the American economy and worker who are inadvertently taking advantage of slave labor that we would not want to take advantage of. What to look for this week as we go forward? The Fed meets this week and will be announcing what they're going to do with rates. Will they keep them the same? Will they raise them? Or will they lower them? With some of the positive news on employment and some of the other manufacturing and other metrics that we talked about last week, it does seem like they might hold things steady for now, given the balancing of different objectives. So we will see. In other news, big tech companies have more earnings reports that are coming out this week. So again, these are going to be particularly interesting to see how they are monetizing AI and if they are successfully recouping some of their investment costs. So we can be looking for Meta. Meta will be reporting on Wednesday, and Amazon will be reporting on Thursday. The big question, again, is where is the payoff going to come? How are they going to recoup their investment? That is the question that we've been asking this year and maybe asking for some years in the future as AI actually becomes fully developed and operational. For the verse of this week, we'll look at Proverbs 24, verses 30 to 34. I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense, and behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. Oh, be encouraged to work hard as unto the Lord this week. Be reminded to, work diligently with everything that the Lord has put in front of you to do. I hope you will join us next week, and you will like and share with those who will benefit from this biblical market approach. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
The topics discussed in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investing and investment strategies involve risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. All information herein is from sources believed reliable, but is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. The team assumes no liability for any errors, omissions, or actions taken based on this material. Information is as of the date stated and subject to change without notice. Securities and advisory services offered through Genius Wealth Management. Member FINRA and SIPC.